So, Joan, you're going to start us off, I believe.
Before Joan starts us off,
Okay. Yeah.
uh, we really looking forward to talking today. And Joan is just going to give a little bit of our history, her and mine, in a few words. And then right at the very end, we're going to model Theological Action Research, pretending to be an outsider group. And then we'll invite you to be part of the outsider group and join with us discussing one of the children's research that was done. Now, one of the people here in this meeting knows one of the preschools, and I need to ask, because of data protection, that we refer to the preschool as a green preschool. Because if somebody finds the recording and then they find my doctorate, they might be able to identify. We want to make sure that none of the children can be identified. And the name that I'll be using is a research name that was chosen by the child. So just for the data protection, that's
Yeah.
quite, we're going to look after that bit. And I'm sharing my unpublished doctoral work. So I've been currently writing a chapter on methodology. And last week, I shared a little bit about a Froebelian understanding of spirituality with the Child Theology Africa movement. And we have shared that amongst ourselves, and maybe it's possible to share the link to that in the chat for anybody who wants to know a little bit more about Pandita Ramadbai. And we spend some time talking about her and her. I talk about her link as an early Froebelian scholar and theologian, and mention Keith's work in this regard. So, my title of my doctorate is Facilitating Child-Led Eco-Theology, a Theological Action Research project co-led by preschool children. I'm going to hand over to Joan now, and then we'll start the PowerPoint.
Yes, thank you, Bridget. Bridget asked me to give a very short history of our journey. We met 48 years ago, and our friendship developed over the years, and together we explored so many things in terms of understanding the world around us, understanding ourselves, understanding people, and when we had children and families, we started really delving into children and understanding them. And so our journey towards finding a meaningful way to nurture children's spirituality has been side by side, even though Bridget lives in London now and I have continued living in South Africa. And our conversations, uh, when we regularly meet online, we have enriching conversations that have helped us both move towards where we are now and how we get informed within our work. Bridget has been incredible in the work that she has done, and it has mirrored so much of my work. And so I was so privileged when she asked me to be part of her outsider group. My work as a support person for new moms and as a music therapist and then a play therapist, and now in the last few years in working in my daughter's Montessori preschool has been really it put me in the space where I have longingly looked at the work that Bridget has done, and I'm so keen to use some of what she has done in my work. And so, yes, that was partly why she asked me to be part of the outsider group, which has been very very interesting and enriching. Bridget, was there anything else you you
That's
wanted?
brilliant, Joan. That Joan and I are both godly play practitioners, so we've been practicing godly play, sitting on the floor in a circle of children for, I think it must be 17 years, Joan.
Well, from 2004, so it's 22 years.
Wow. And I still find this is the most beautiful way to have spiritual conversations with children. I'm going to share the screen and then I'm going to take you on a journey. I'm hoping you're ready for joining me on a pilgrimage. Can everyone see that? Frederick Froebel's understanding of spirituality, I'm going to talk a bit about that briefly. But Frederick Froebel was the founder of kindergartens, lived in the 1800s, and said that play is the highest phase of children's development. It is a purest, most spiritual activity of humans at this stage, and at the same time, typical of human life as a whole, of the inner natural life in people and in all things. And my research, together with an insider group of preschool children and an outsider group, reflector group online, has been a joint research journey, which Joan and I have been part of together. So it's very much I'm sharing research done by a group rather than myself as an individual. It's a slow form of research. So if you want to, delve into Clarke's Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child, that would give you a bit of an understanding about it. The Froebel Trust website is a very good resource. And we're going to start the journey now. Rebecca and I and Habe, when they wrote, it must be 20 years ago, maybe now, 2009, or before then, it talked about relational consciousness. And they talked about this connection with self, God, the world, and others. And this is when we think about definitions of spirituality, this can be seen in the pediatric chaplaincy world, this definition within medicine as a whole, within education. So it's a widely used definition of spirituality. But the first person I found that spoke about this was Frederick Froebel. And he talked about unification or wholeness, life being maybe, for lack of a better word, being self-actualized. He talks about accepting every child as having divine, earthly, and human attributes, and says that people, as children, they belong to God, nature, and humanity, and hold the present, the past, and the future. I was invited to write 2 pages in this book, How to Do Theological Action Research, and I recommend it. So it's a collaborative project between the Susanna Wesley Foundation and the Theological and Action Research Network. And this is my methodology that I used with the children over the summer. I'm just going to read an extract from the book because I write in the book a little bit about working ethically with children. Conducting theological action research with children has delicate ethical implications because children are included in the entire research journey. Clarifying the difference between the theology of childhood, children as a subject, children's theology, children as partial participants, and theology by children is key. Theology by children, in the case of theological action research, includes children as independent, active agents throughout their research, with the adults as gatekeepers, active research designers, and co-interpreters. I then talk a little bit about learning from experience. I talk about a little bit about the methods that I use, and I give a list of some key issues to bear in mind. And then there's a couple of references. So I reference the Froebel Trust, Froebelian Principles and Practice. I reference Our Voices, which is Open University course on research with and by children and young people, and the British Educational Research Association with their ethical guidance. The book is you're able to buy an online copy if you go to either the Susanna Wesley Foundation or the Theological Action Research Network. And it explains the whole journey. It's there for lay people, for theologians, and for researchers and students. So it's got different aspects on the journey, and it's designed as a set out like a pilgrimage. I took this photo on my campus, and as you see here, there are two geese. One of the things, there's certain things that one has to be willing to do if one is going to engage in theological action research, and especially theological action research with children. And that is, one has to be willing to lose immense, a huge quantity, a vast amount of data, because the research process is not controlled by the individual researcher. It's controlled by the group. It's very situational. And more importantly, it's controlled by the children. And when we mirror our reflections, Joan and I will be talking about what we might not be able to include or what we could include when we thinking about the research that children have conducted, especially when it's theological research. Now, with theological action research, there are two groups. There's the insider reflective group, and that consisted of me and the preschool children and one or sometimes two of the staff members from the preschool. I want to, going forward, recommend that the same pattern is followed as Godly Play, where there are two people, a storyteller and a door person, so that reflection can also happen straight away instead of just waiting for the group online. So this is your insider group, and then you've got an outsider group, which is a group of appropriate adults. And in my case, it was leaders from the 3 different preschools and people from both various academic and political backgrounds. So we had leaders in NGOs, Joan as a Godly Play trainer. We had another person who's a lead researcher for a big organization and for a university. And then we had people that were interested in, one of the researchers actually is interested in eco-theology, and so brought that side of the wisdom into the group. So here we have the journey. As you see, there's a pathway, and TAR is Theological Action Research, or shortened, often people say TAR, is a participatory pilgrimage, where really it's based on faith-seeking understanding. And when it comes to children, this is done through reflective play, storytelling, and processing information mainly through craft. as we journeyed together, we spent time exploring and planning, gathering and discerning, and naming and sharing. Where my journey differed from the other theological action research literature, and you will find there are lots of good books. Here's one, a recent book by Claire Watkins, one of the founders of Theological Action Research, The Disclosing Church, is that when theological action research is done with adults, the research question, the group decides on the research question. Because I only had a summer to do the research and only 6 sessions in each preschool, I chose a broad research question for the children, and then they reflected. They were the researcher and the subject of their research. And the research question was, I think they were exploring their outdoor space, and the research question was, does being outside help us connect with ourselves, others, the natural world, and God? So the idea with theological action research is it keeps the whole journey theological all the way through. So we have myself with the big yellow footprints, and then here we have the Greens preschool with 6 sessions. Joan and I will be sharing just one child's journey through these 6 sessions. Then we had the blue preschool with their 6 sessions, then the red preschool. And you get the snowballing effect that happens with theological action research because it's a learning journey. Finally, we had the children had an art exhibit. So they, at the end of each research session, they displayed their research, the children at their preschool. And then finally, I put all 3 preschools' research up at the university, and the children came to view their research, and we had a colloquium, and Keith was part of that, and so was Joan and a couple of other people. And that's how I landed up being here. So we had 33 children as co-researchers, and 17 of these came to see the final exhibition. The idea with theological action research is it isn't a research project that just finishes. The whole purpose of theology, and especially when we think of faith-seeking understanding, is to transform and renew practice, and also to transform and renew the theological accounts of practice. Now, key to theological action research are the 4 voices. And I'm going to talk through that because I've only recently come to understand the 4 voices, being a mature student and late to some theological concepts. I initially thought they were very distinct, and they're not at all. I want you rather to think about a piece of cake, and in particular, a rainbow cake. And if you can think of a vanilla and chocolate with chocolate in between flavor, that's what I'm wanting you to think about when we think about the 4 voices. The 4 voices flow within the whole research journey, ebbing and flowing, and they create an integrated conversation. They mix together, but like the mice, one of my favorite children's books called Mouse Paint, where the mice mix up different colors. And as you well know, when you mix up the colors I've got there, you will get a lovely chocolatey brown. So they mix together, and they mix together forming a listening and reflection, where there's this dialogue that happens. So you've got the operant voice, which is embedded in actual practices. So what is done? And in the case of my research, it would be what was done in the preschools. So I was in 2 preschools from from two different religions with religious traditions as a heritage, and one it was a secular preschool. Then we have the espoused voice, which is what the group says it does and believes. So all the preschools said that they promoted children being outdoors, but one of the preschools had plastic flowers in the flower bed, where the other preschool children were growing fruit and vegetables and eating them. So there's sometimes a difference in one of the preschools, the children couldn't sit on the grass outside because it was a shared space. Now, the two preschools that didn't grow fruit and vegetables did take their children to parks and to forest schools. And sometimes we have to look behind the things that we see that are lacking and think, what else are they doing to fill this gap? And what are parents doing? What is the community doing? The formal voice is our academic voices. And today I'm amongst many people who have a long career in providing that voice for children and child theology. And these voices are often interdisciplinary, and we have obviously children's theology, which as a formal voice. Then we've got the normative voice, which is sources of authority and established traditions. So we find the United Nations say that we have to look after children's spirituality. So does the British laws around education and children. It often doesn't happen in context because people are very scared that they're going to say or do the wrong thing, and nobody knows how to nurture. A lot of people don't know how to nurture children's spirituality because in a lot of ways it looks very different to adult spirituality. Not always, but sometimes it looks different. And again, that's what we'll be talking about when Joan and I reflect. The tool that recently came out, I think it was last year, is a Froebelian tool called Reflection with Guidance. And we put this alongside Froebel's understanding of spirituality, the relational connection. And this looks at context, actors' actions and relatedness, network of development and learning, and transformations. And this is a very useful tool if you're working with children and you want to have a conversation where you keep the child centered to the conversation. It's free and it's available online. And we need to just, what I love about theological action research is it's contextual. And I think this is very important that we meet children where they are and in the context of their preschools and families and communities. We look at the interrelatedness, and we look at how play helps inform not only development and learning, but also spiritual growth. And then we notice transformations, which Joan and I are going to be noticing when we talk. And now I bring you to a picture that I took just before the first session I had in the Green Preschool. And I'm going to read you just my notes that I took on the day when I finished the first session. The children got involved in research before I'd even begun. And really, we had 3 sessions of getting ready for research and then 3 sessions where we did research, because I wanted to make sure that the children knew what they were doing and that they could give assent to the research. So the first session, we used the hungry caterpillar, and I introduced the research question using a finger rhyme. So I am here, you are here, the world is here, and we are here together. And as I was setting up, the head teacher had been very good at briefing the staff about the research, and the teachers knew to follow my lead if I wasn't doing anything, not to interfere, and that the research was a children's research space. Emerald has special needs. Before story time, now, what I need to mention is I use the word they instead of he or she, just because we tend to place a huge, some of us, a huge emphasis on, oh, that's what little girls do or little boys do. So it gives me a further layer of anonymity for the child. So I'm not mentioning gender. Emerald has special needs. Before story time, they stayed and played and took all the felted balls and tipped them onto the floor, and then added the crocheted balls and the balls with these two crocheted balls and the felted balls of Froebel's first gifts. They then used tweezers to pick them up and put them back into the basket. They made room for 4 other children to join them. The children joined in, and Emerald gave them tweezers and moved so they also had space. They were very generous with the balls. One child only collected blue balls, another one collected a variety, and Emerald gave them both a choice of balls from their full basket. Emerald seemed very happy and contented, and sang the cleaning up song as they picked the balls they tipped on the floor up one by one with the tweezers. Now, what was interesting is Emerald normally doesn't join in circle time. And Emerald joined in circle time after coming in and tipping everything on the floor and picking it up. And the following session where we talked about, I read them the picture book about children and research that I designed, Emerald stayed in the circle time. The third session, which was a full godly play session, where we pivoted into research, into the following section where we did the Theological Action Research, and then the children analyzed their research. And then the final session, the children shared their research findings. This time, the third session with the godly play session, Emerald did not join the circle time and chose to spend the time at the far side of the playground with their support worker. They then came to collect some chalk during the response time. They were keen to hear the story one-to-one, and I shared the story of the greatest gifts, the story of creation with them. They spent a lot of time feeling the story. It was raised so they could feel it, and they then proceeded to draw a big rainbow all around where they sat. And then they asked for the research camera and took a photo of it. During this session, they took many photos. Here you see the final display that was up in the green preschool, and then it was up with the display of the blue and orange preschool at the university. And to the far right, you should see Emerald's research work that they chose to have on the display. And you'll see they chose a photo that I actually, no, did I take it? Maybe one of the children did. I can't remember who took it, but it could have been a photo I took of the balls. And then to the left, you can see 3 photos that they took, 2 of which are of the rainbow. On the final day of the research, the children shared the research picture with other children in the preschool and with some of the staff and with one of the founders of the preschool and trustee. And Emerald went back into the research space after everyone had left, picked up the photo they'd taken, the one that I've drawn the circle round. I had spare photos. These were the spare photos that the children could take home with them. And they carefully peeled the photo off the backing and took it over to another child who had special needs, who was nonverbal, used a push chair, and was very small for their age. This child hadn't been part of the research group, but was with the younger group of children. Emerald gave the picture to this child. The child took the picture, looked at it, and crumpled it up into a ball. The teaching assistant gently took it away from the child, smoothed it carefully, gave it back to Emerald, and Emerald gifted the picture back to the child in the pushchair. At this point, I'm going to say thank you and suggest that we could follow Froebel's footsteps. Let us learn from our children and let us live with our children. Joan and I am going to stop sharing, and Joan and I are now going to have a little chat as if we were thinking about Emerald's research as an outsider, as we did in the outsider group. So we were a group of, I think, 5 or 6, met online for an hour, and we discussed some of the findings that the children presented. So, Joan, I noticed that when I arrived, that the teaching assistant was quite nervous. I think she wanted the children to be on best behavior, and she was very keen to be part of the research. And she was using many words and commands to guide Emerald while I set up the research space. And then the children came in, began to play, and that's when Emerald became interested in the display and then started tipping things.
Is that when Emerald tipped the balls?
Yes. So I sat back from a little distance away. I just sat on the ground and I quietly observed, and the teaching assistant followed my lead.
Oh, that's wonderful. Because sometimes that can put a lot of pressure on you as or you're not the researcher, as the new adult in the room, when what you hope to achieve is changed by the people that normally run the circle. And that also puts pressure on the children, which may have influenced Emerald's behavior, feeling that sort of stress to behave. Do you think that played a role?
Yes, later on, and actually I've got a little bit what the lead from the preschool mentioned, but later on, this was a normal behavior of Emerald when they felt they couldn't cope. They would tip things over. Okay. So when they'd been maybe having too many commands all at once, I thought maybe it was about that. But yes, it was difficult for me because I had set up getting everything ready, and obviously had a certain time period that I was going to run through my, if you like, lesson with the children to introduce them to the that day I was introducing them to the research structure.
So I know that you got information afterwards from the teachers, some more information about the children, which I don't think you went in with. You didn't find out their stories before.
No.
So I wonder how your sitting back and listening changed Emerald's behavior. Was there a change from normal when the teaching assistant might have stepped in before in normal class space, and now you were sitting back and the teaching assistant followed you? I wonder how that changed Emerald's normal behavior. You gave a space that perhaps Emerald hadn't had before.
Well, what the leader of Green Preschool said, and I'm just going to read from our Theological Action Research outsider group notes. They replied by saying that although they weren't there at the time, they enjoyed hearing the story from the key worker. And they thought it was a beautiful opportunity to see what happened and emerged, to give a child space to see what happened and emerged. This adult in our adult group wondered how important it was for Emerald to have this opportunity, because the staff's natural tendency in the past was to tell them not to throw things on the floor. And because I, as a researcher, had allowed this to happen, it allowed the staff to see the benefits of giving Emerald space and time. So I do think that it's that thing of relinquishing ownership as an adult of a shared research space that's quite important in this. But I also wonder whether Emerald would have engaged in research through the entire research process if this hadn't happened before the research began.
Oh, you're saying that gave her, she discovered in her research, actually, it was her own personal research to see what would happen if she threw everything. Perhaps she was, I'm saying she, and I do apologize for that because you mentioned a rainbow. And when I hear rainbows, I tend to think little girls. So I don't know if Emerald's a girl or a boy, but Emerald was doing their own research and throwing things around and seeing how people respond. And in your case, you responded differently. So the research had a different outcome.
Yes, and I think Emerald's way of researching was very different. Sometimes children mature in different things at different times, and sometimes children have different sensory needs or ways of exploring the world. So when the second session where I had Froebel's second gift, so what you saw in the picture was Froebel's first gift, with the 6 balls with the primary and secondary colors. The second session, I had Froebel's second gift of the cylinder, cube, and sphere. And Emerald took a photo of another child playing with it, and Emerald then took the gift and actually tasted it. Tasted the wood and then started spinning, because they're on strings, you can spin them, and was very happy spinning the spheres. And so I think those sort of things then gave Emerald permission to be part of the research.
But it's just interesting to observe the layers of research that's happening there, because Emerald was doing research in her own life. And children do that. They research what, without thinking about it, what their actions can lead to. And it's kind of, in a sense, like testing boundaries, I guess, but it's also a form of research. How does the world respond when I do this? And by coming in and providing a different response to what Emerald had before, it opened something new for them and gave them an open door into another world of research, perhaps. And then, of course, I find it so fascinating the way this work happens, because now you, as another researcher, you are also watching that. Of course, you can't touch that in your work because that's not the children's research, but there's another layer there where you are researching and watching what the children do. Not, as you said, you'd lose so much data, not just of your own, but of what the children present, because you cannot interpret. We had conversations about interpreting children's work and not being able to do that.
Yes, because in our we had our second meeting as an outsider group where we discussed it, and then the third meeting where both times we discussed Emerald's research, and the second meeting where we met to discuss it, some of the adults raised a question whether it was a preference, whether they were Emerald was throwing balls on the floor because they wanted to make decisions. My take had been on it that from my lived experience of being neurodivergent with learning difficulties, that I thought it was a form of self-regulation, and that adults, we can mask our differences, but it's much harder for a child who, if they're feeling like they're dysregulating, to mask that. And then one of the other adults in the groups asked whether it was a self-regulation or control question, saying they had problems if it was child trying to take control. And
yeah, I remember that conversation.
I
And
think
that of course comes from personal experience.
yes.
Your personal experience, and it affects how you hold that space. It's a sort of a mutual back and forth.
So this was interesting because a couple of us in the group were all projecting our own, myself, the neurodiversity, another adult feeling it was inappropriate for a child to be in control in a situation where adults should be in control. We had somebody else with another voice. And it's all these different voices with theological action research that come together, and then sitting with these voices. And I think as we discussed that, we discussed how we couldn't share additional information about this child because it was their research journey. So I'd noticed coming into the preschool that the child struggled to get, the second day I came, to transition from leaving a parent into the preschool, and didn't want to cross the threshold, which we get with young children. They don't want to say goodbye. And actually the staff were very good. They said he or she's going to be fine. And they were fine. They literally, the minute they were over the threshold, they were at home at the preschool, but they were struggling with that. And so it's this thing about, if we're going to really have child-led research, how do we keep the child central? And I think right at the second session where we discussed it, again, this is where it's so helpful to have one of the staff. So the head of the preschool, who was part of our groups, reflected on Froebel's relational consciousness of self, others, and the natural world and the transcendental God, and said this. She said quite nice, really, because you can see the link with everything. This is the story of Emerald giving the picture to the other child of the rainbow that they'd drawn and then photographed. I can see, because they're drawing a rainbow round themselves, feels like they're connecting with the world. It seems like it's a world, and there's something going on around them, and that's nature, and that's God. And then they go and they give it to their friend, and that's the others. So now we would like to invite you to join in this conversation, and we'll see where it goes. It is very quiet.
Well, I can affirm it is so groundbreaking that I'm still catching up as a person who works with children and tries to process how they are interpreting the world around them. But I think, Bridget, it almost takes a neurodiverse person to think out of the box and push boundaries to what is possible. So I love what you're doing, and guide us through it. How do we participate in this exercise?
Well, just what you're sharing now, Charmaine, is really important. And this is where we place the child central, just the way Jesus did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're doing. I think there's that understanding that as we are invited into these sacred conversations, if you like, playful conversations with children, that we are participating in the kingdom of heaven.
I like the process of slow learning. And so stepping back to reflect on what you're observing as the child observes and responds. So, like Joan said, thinking about how they might be exploring boundaries is a type of research. How exciting is that children are researching all the time? But now we can give the language to it. And so I'm more processing what I've just experienced rather than being part of the exercise you've invited us into as co-researchers, if you like. But thank you for allowing me to just come to the table at my slow pace.
You are so welcome.
I wanted to say that when we had those conversations last year, Bridget, they were also slow conversations because it's so much to take in, and sometimes there's a shift, a paradigm shift in little ways here and there, and to try and understand and to really move from researching children from an adult point of view to creating the type of space where children can research. That's quite a big shift. And so the understanding, the listening, the looking, and the conversations that we had as an outsider group were also slow. The slow learning that we encourage in children, because that's the deep learning, I think. And so we also need to slow our learning and our responses and our understanding down. And so a lot emerged, but it was slow sometimes. Sometimes we thought for a long time.
So I'm a little with Charmaine about just trying to absorb what you shared with us and models. And I've got all sorts of questions. Right. So you've focused heavily in the way you've modeled it to us on one of the children.
Yes.
I want to know whether did you have the similar conversations about every single child?
I can share with you a story that Leaf was very involved in the research. Would you like to hear Leaf's story? So Leaf helped set up from the second day, was in charge of putting the tweezers and self-appointed in charge of putting out tweezers and various things, and took photographs of the setting up work they'd done and had chosen their research name. And I was only expecting the children to start doing the research after the full Godly Play session. So it surprised me that they were already that engaged early on. And all the children at the Green Preschool were used to the head teacher's got a beautiful signing. I must ask permission to share it, but a British Sign Language rhyme that she shares. And it's very in keeping with Froebel's mother and children's songs, where Froebel talks about children playing from the moment that they are being fed by their parents. So almost at the breast, if you like. I had drawn out the I am here, you are here, the world is here, and we are here together. And Leaf came and said, no, you've got to have, instead of the hands here for the world, you've got to have them out here. So I had to redraw it bigger. And then at the end of the third day, I was still hanging around and that session had finished. And I asked after every session, I used wondering questions, which we use in Godly Play. I wonder what you like best. I wonder what was the most important part. And Leaf walked up. I was saying goodbye to the head teacher, and Leaf walked up completely out of the blue, stood in front of us and said, "You know what I liked best?" So we said, "No, what did you like best?" And they then did the sign, the rhyme. So I'm here, you are here, the world is here, and we are here together. And so we did it with them. And then they said, "I do this often when I'm at home." So the head teacher said, "Oh, have you told your parents about this?" "No," said Leaf. Leaf is 4. "No," said Leaf, "I do this on my own." Now, later, and I think Leaf shared their research with some other people, but I did ask Leaf on the last research day, "Is this a story that you would be happy for me to share?" And Leaf got the sweetest smile and gave consent. So I'm sharing this story from Leaf with you.
Thank you.
So what I can tell you is my observation was Leaf was wearing something round their neck that indicated that they weren't from a Christian faith tradition. Yes, to share any more data would probably, again, muddy things and not be necessary. Does that help a little bit?
It helps a little bit, but yeah, other people want to jump in.
Bridget, I absolutely love this work. I am texting Charmaine on this. I'm like, I love this. It's exciting. And I think I had a question, and my question, you've actually answered it, because I was going to ask why this form of research. And as you were talking, by the way, I love your calming. It calms me down. I don't know if this is what you do with the kids, but it did something to me. I just honestly just feel a little bit settled after a very, interesting day. So thank you. Whatever it is with your voice, well done. Keep using it. And I feel you've already answered it, which is why this form of research in this way, like Shaman said, is groundbreaking. And I wonder, I wrote experiences inform one's research. Is it because you yourself have experienced life being neurodiverse yourself in a certain way? Why this way? It is beautiful.
Thank you. I want to say there've been lots of things that have found me rather than me finding them. A good friendship group, and Joan being part of that. I failed my first year of school. My nickname was Bridget the Fidget. So, I tick all the boxes. But I'm learning to dance to my own rhythm as a multiply neurodivergent person. And that has helped. I had to do some reflections myself, so I overdid it, because we often do. And I thought, if the children are going to have an art exhibition, I need to have one too. So for my 60th birthday, the year before I did the research with the children, I did a little art exhibition called Then and Now, and it's now called You Are Neuro Beautiful. But I wrote reflections because I didn't know, when I did my master's, I didn't know how to do reflections. Now, I thought I was particularly stupid because I just couldn't get it right. I'd done some youth-led research, but I couldn't find my voice and how my voice fitted in with other voices. What I needed theological action research. What I needed before theological action research was the Frobel training on. They've got a fantastic online training thing. Anybody who's interested in young children, it's really worth it. And before that, it was godly play. So there are all these wonderful tools that are already there. Loose parts play, I use that a lot. Using the mosaic approach to research, which is a well-known action research tool within early years pedagogy. So I'm relying, what you're hearing all that's happened is I'm playing with very well formed ideas that have been around for a long time. Some of which, like Pandita Ramabai, some of these are her ideas, some of these are Froebel's ideas. So they're ideas that come over a quite, I'd say, over 200 years. So it's not just my voice, it's just that I like putting two things together and saying, what will this happen if we put all these things together? And then we've got this lovely thing of other people's voices, like we're doing now. So where we hearing each other.
We've got about 5 more minutes, I think, for any interaction with Bridget and Joan, and then the last 10 minutes or so just to catch up with any news. So anyone else like to chip in at this point?
I would just like to say that, Bridget, the way I intend on using your research. So I can't wait for it to be finalized or formalized, is we know about the child participation principle. And as you say, these are well-formed ideas and concepts. But when it comes to implementing child participation, allowing children to express themselves in age-appropriate and child-appropriate ways, so that us as adults can acknowledge their agency, respect their dignity, and give platform for a child to process possibly trauma, possibly life change and transitions, or just becoming more resilient. You are taking these concepts and putting them into practice in ways that we can then learn from and duplicate and scale up. And I think that it will be able to be actioned in many different spaces, in social services, in churches, in family training, in so many ways where the child is better centered. So I see the research as very useful in a practical way, because those concepts are great, but we don't know how to put them into practice. And you're showing us ways. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have one thing, but you mentioned something about timing, and that you only had limited time with each, but you've also mentioned that the children got involved in the research very, very spontaneously and seemingly quickly, or more quick than you may have anticipated that they might get involved in the research side of things. And so I just wondered, would you want to have more time or less time on this? Was this the right amount of time? If somebody was looking to do something similar, or to learn from children in other capacities, really?
Well, there are some very good doctoral research that's been done where children have been part of the research journey, not a part of the entire research journey. Sisanos is one of the children's theologians that's done child-led research. And there is a new paper out, I know it's from Edinburgh, I will be quoting it in my research, where children chose a research question. But to do that, and it wasn't theological action research or theological child-led theology, what it took, the researchers had to be embedded in the research space. So if Joan was doing this as part of being a teacher in her daughter's preschool, it would look different because she would have more time with the children than I had. I was coming in to run a session of an hour and a half, which sometimes was a bit longer. So the preschool, because the day is child-led, they didn't have lessons for the children. But the other two preschools, they have a very strict timetable with lessons. So it differs. And so that's where the journey, as I'm now going to the three, I'm going to be writing over the summer and into next year, the 3 chapters, one for each of the preschool spaces. So hopefully we'll finish by next September, if not sooner. So that's my hope. So watch the space. So there's a lot that's still unknown about the journey.
Bridget, Joan, thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure people will be digesting. And as I said, the recording will be on the website, so which might be one way of helping people digest, so they can re-listen to and re-look at the conversation. But huge thank you, and the virtual applause of Zoom comes your way.
Thank you.
Before we draw to a close, because we try to make sure we keep to time and these things, Keith, would you like to say a little bit more about the 2 new books which are now available?
You hear me, Paul?
Yep.
Yeah, just to say they're companions. So one child, a reader in child theology for those alongside children, and the companion child theology for theologians, a reader. So they are gleanings from the journey of child theology in its first 25 years, in fact, in its first 20 years. So from different parts of the world. And 3 people, John Collier, John McNeill, and Sally Nash, went through the increasing amount of material available and sought to bring it together. So varied topics and so on. Some were articles, some were papers with varied contexts. So a PhD on Karl Barth and children, for example, was the setting of one, and others from papers given at circles around in different parts of the world. So yeah, we now have them. It's a way of celebrating the journey thus far, I think. Happy to respond to anything else or whatever.
How might people get hold of a copy?
Well, that's a really, really good question, because they're that's something that Caroline has asked in the space where she works. She said, it's very good you've got them. You keep on producing books, Keith. What do we do? So that's a very, very good question. They exist at this moment. They exist at Millgrove. They've just arrived. So that's one way of getting them, I guess, on the website, asking questions and so on. But this is yeah, something, Paul, where I was going to ask the trustees. Now we've got them. I didn't want to presume, but now we've got them. How do we get them disseminated? A very simple thing is we are looking for those who might review them. So any who are attending today, for example, if they would like, or they know others who might be willing to review them, then I guess they're going to be available on the website. Sorry, what I mean is via the website.
And Mary's asked what's the cost?
Oh, dear Mary, she's so much more practical than I am. I don't know. I think it's something like £10 £10, I think, something like that for each book.
Which is remarkably cheap for a theology book these days. So
this is the child theology movement for you, Mary.
Always so generous with your resources.
Great. Does anyone else have any news that they would like to share from what they're up to in child theology? Just turn yourself on rapidly. All right. Okay. So a reminder that the next seminar is going to be on the 7th of September at 1600 British Standard Summertime, with Anne Klitgaard Thompson, a Methodist minister from Denmark, ahead of the publication of her book, What About the Children? Bridget and Joan have led us in very early years. Anne's research is mainly in the kind of 7 to 10-year-old age range, just so that it will be covering a different bit of childhood. And also to say the annual lecture, the second annual lecture, will be on November the 24th, provisionally at 1500. It will be Greenwich Mean Time by then. Keith, have we confirmed yet the lecturer or not? You're on mute, Keith.
We have indeed, yes. So he has agreed, and he is indeed the person we invited from Ethiopia. Why I'm stopping there is because I would need to make sure I have in front of me his name in order to get it right. So could you pause for a moment?
Yeah.
If that's good. So he is actually the country director of Compassion, who's just completed a PhD on children's spirituality, so through the lens of child theology. And I think Sally Nash was one of his either examiners or supervisors. So she was the one who recommended him. And I'm just going to, this is a real challenge of, right. So his name is Sehewota Tadesi. He'll have to forgive me. I'm sure, because I spent quite a bit of time with him. I'm sure he helped me with a shorter version of his first name, Sehewota. Whether someone can help me from East Africa, I'm not sure.
All right. Thank you, Keith. That's November the 24th, 1500 GMT. Contribution from Ethiopia. So our commitment to try and ensure that child theology is an international movement and is listening to different voices from around the world is there and continues. So with deep thanks again to Bridget and to Joan, with thanks to Corinne for making sure that technology worked. In the chat, Bridget's put her email and a reminder of the Child Theology Movement website as well. To those of you who are new, thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed being part of it, and we look forward to welcome you again. And if